My name is Jason Habig. I am a 8th grade history teacher and the debate coach at Hathaway Brown School. I've been involved in speech and debate for more than 25 years, if you count my time as a competitor. I'm excited to talk to you tonight about ways that you can use debate in your classroom. This presentation and series of activities was all created for a 1 credit hour professional development course at Baldwin-Wallace University that you could still take if you were interested in getting graduate credit hours for these courses. And I've designed it hopefully to be as practical and entry level as possible, with the idea that teachers with no experience in debate at all, but who are just interested in maybe integrating some of these activities into their classroom would watch this and adopt some of these policies and projects. I'll put my contact information at the end of the video tonight, but feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. All my contact stuff is also on the OSDA website, theosda.org. So without further ado, I'll begin. The concept of debate across curriculum is not something that I've come up with. There's a number of sort of very active people in the speech and debate community who've been talking about this for a long time. And really, this is just a compilation of all of their work. It's not very much original research or original understanding on my part. I particularly would give a lot of credit to Tuna Snyder from the University of Vermont, and also to the Boston Urban Debate League, who's done a really, really good job of educating inner city teachers in Boston and how to use debate in their classrooms. So those are sort of like the 2 big sources that I'll reference throughout this. And I've just sort of organized things in a way that made sense to me and hopefully makes sense to you. There are 5 modules as part of this program. None of them are horrifically long. And the 4th one is sort of an independent piece on your own. We start off with why debate. You probably don't need to be convinced much because you're already watching this, but I want to talk a little bit about why we should be integrating debate activities into our classrooms, what the benefits are. The 2nd module talks about what is debate. So if you've never watched a debate, what are the parts and the characteristics of it? What are like the essential elements that we would need to do these activities in our classrooms? Module 3 is how. So how would you, once I've convinced you that this is the way to go, and you know a little bit about what a debate looks like, how would you then implement this in your classroom? So I've got some sort of hands-on tips for that. At that point, it probably would be great if you sort of paused the recording tonight, worked on a lesson plan of your own. Ideally, you can come up with ways that you would implement this in the short term in your classroom. That's my big goal, is that we get as many teachers as possible to actually do this. And then at the end, module 5 looks at identifying the challenges. So now that we've thought through and started to implement these strategies in our classroom, what are the things that we're going to need to constantly be aware of and tweaking in order to make them as effective as they can be? So historically, debate has been an extracurricular activity. The National Speech and Debate Association has existed in the United States for 80 plus years. Many schools at some point in their history have been involved in the activity. There's a lot of problems though I love extracurricular speech and debate. There are a lot of problems with it. It requires a tremendous amount of time and money. Schools increasingly don't have people who are interested in coaching it. As sad as that is for me to say, it's a big commitment for students who have lots of other things they could be doing with their extracurricular time. And if we really think that debate is valuable, we can't just put it outside the school day. We have to make it central to what we do here in our classrooms. And I believe that the educational value of this is so great that for kids who want to go above and beyond, making an extracurricular is awesome, but we can't just leave it to that. It really needs to be central to what we do as educators. The first reason why this is so important is sort of like Ed Psych 101. If you remember Bloom's taxonomy, the more we move up the pyramid, the deeper the thinking and the more likely it is that students are going to be not only engaged, but also creating meaningful experiences that are going to help them remember material long term. And if you just look at the things at the top of Bloom's taxonomy, they're all words that exemplify what would go on in a debate, right? to argue, to defend, to judge, to select, to support, to critique, to weigh. Those are all, that's the evaluation strand. Those are all things that are elemental to what goes on in a debate. So these activities can really help us push our students to do deeper, higher level critical thinking, rather than just sort of more rote learning of whatever the content is in our classroom. Debate is also really, really effective at teaching real world skills. No matter what jobs our students have in the future, they're going to do some speaking. They're going to need to be able to react to changing circumstances and criteria. That's why they need those critical thinking skills. Many of these professions are going to involve the ability to do research. Debate is a great way to do all of those things. Those are probably pretty obvious, and you could have listed them before you watched this video. Debate is also really important for teaching a huge variety of soft skills, skills that are essential for academic success and aren't necessarily what you might think when you first think about a debate. You can't debate if you can't listen. So debaters become much better listeners because they have to hear the arguments made by their opponents and incorporate responses to them. Debates oftentimes have many arguments, and they require a tremendous dexterity when it comes to note taking, which is an important skill for a variety of different academic purposes. Debate teaches you to be more organized, teaches you to deepen your reading skills, all of which are maybe not the first things you'd think of, but are skills we want our students to have, and debate can teach all of these things quite well at the same time. There's a tremendous amount of evidence. Now, a lot of this research is done with inner city students because there's just been a lot of money and time invested with increasing debate in urban settings because it had fallen off so greatly until about the last 15 or 20 years. So this study by Professor Wade at Georgia State looks at how students are more engaged when their classroom teachers incorporate debate as an activity. And you can see significant teacher quantification that their students were increasingly engaged when they incorporated debate in their classroom. It also hopefully allows us to diversify our assessments. In my own building, when we've talked about doing debate activities, the one issue that I often hear from teachers the most is that there's no room in the curriculum. I can't add in anything else. I can barely cover the topics that I need to cover. And my response to that always is debate does not have to be one more thing. It could be the thing, right? There are ways that I could work in debate activities as my formative assessments or as my summative assessments and replace other assessments that I had used previously that maybe are less dynamic, or maybe my goal is just to diversify the array of assessments I provide to get as much data about my students and their students with different learning styles and learning needs as possible. Debate provides us with that opportunity, and I would encourage you tonight to not think about debate as the thing you got to add into your curriculum, but instead the thing that you can use in order to diversify what you're already doing and make it richer. The final thing, and maybe, again, you probably would have thought of this on your own, but I'm increasingly finding this is a more and more important topic for educators to tackle. Our students are bombarded with social media streams, with all kinds of misinformation and disinformation on the internet, and they're swimming through all of this stuff as they try to process the world around them. It's really important that we build in moments where they can model civic dialogue. There's lots of ways to do that in a classroom. You can have all kinds of very respectful discussions. And one of the nice things that I like about debate is its structure and its focus on issues that are often controversial create a world where students kind of, maybe for the first time, even understand how to engage with people that have a different point of view in a way that isn't name calling, meme posting on social media. Okay. I view this ability to look at things from different points of view and treat other points of view, even if you don't agree with them, with respect, as sort of a foundational element of what it means for multicultural education. So it's really important that we can model that in our classrooms and create moments for students to experience that, because the world around us is not providing them with those opportunities. And maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago it did. in a way that was much better than now. And hopefully educators see that as space that they need to carve out in order to protect, in order to help our students grow and think and thrive in a society where they can look at things from different perspectives. Thinking about module 2, right? So hopefully we went through that first one fast, primarily because I don't feel like you needed much convincing if you already came to watch this. We got to jump into now, what is debate? So how does debate work? What are the elements of it? As you think about building lessons in your own classroom, what are the things that you would really need to make sure that you included? There are lots of different formats of debate as an extracurricular activity, but they all pretty much contain 4 essential elements. And whatever debate you were creating in your classroom probably would want to incorporate these same things. A constructive in a debate is a pre-written speech that incorporates sort of the introduction of all the arguments for your side. Those constructives vary in length for the different extracurricular debate events, and they would probably vary in length for your event as well. But the idea of the constructive is that either the individual student who's representing a side of an argument or the group of the students who are working together to represent that side would present a sort of prepared statement of what the research and thought that they put into the topic. That's probably the biggest writing piece, and is a great way for you to assess argumentative writing in the form of a constructive speech. All debates, maybe not the presidential debates as I noted here, sort of tongue in cheek, but all debates have some form of rebuttal. So students would need to have taken notes on the constructive presented by the other side and in some way respond to it with arguments that maybe they'd thought through, but they definitely didn't pre-write because they weren't sure exactly what their opponents would say. That's a really key critical thinking on your feet aspect of how debate is supposed to work. Most, not all, but most formats of debate contain some form of cross-examination. This would be the time where students could directly interact with each other rather than just have a speech that came after someone else's speech. And they would have a chance to ask questions and answer the questions posed by their opponents. Cross-examination is a wonderful learning opportunity for students. Again, it builds critical thinking skills. It forces them to interact in a respectful way. You may choose not to have that as an option in a debate you'd hold in your classroom, but ideally you would find some time for that. And then the 4th piece is preparation time. Again, sometimes in creating these activities, as you'll see, we're kind of pressed for time. And, we're going to have them do things for homework or squeeze out as much of this preparation time as possible so that, we can fit them all speaking into a class period or 2 class periods. I would really encourage you not to do that if possible. Obviously, time is finite. We got to get these things done in our instructional time. But the most valuable time that you have in a debate is the time right before a kid is going to be expected to stand and deliver. So if that's 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes where they could work on their own or work in a group before they would stand up and respond to questions or respond to arguments made by the other team, that's probably the most valuable, focused academic time that we can get from many students. And we want to maximize that, not minimize it. So I would just encourage you to think about that as you go through and make preparations for what a debate might look like in your own classroom. The things that you need to think about as you're constructing a debate in your classroom. So I called them the essential elements. We'll talk about these on the next several slides. Advocacy, structured argument, text-based evidence, note-taking, and student engagement. A lot of these things, I find that sometimes the terminology is what gets in the way here, right? Like structured argument, that probably is very similar to something that you're already teaching. If you're somebody who's teaching in a social studies or language arts classroom, many teachers of pretty much every grade level and every discipline are encouraging students to use text-based evidence. You might not call it that, but that is a key academic skill. So don't let the terminology fool you. A lot of these are the things you're already teaching your students to do and already assessing them on. We just need to sort of build in debate formats that allow them to show those things and maximize that for the learning in your classroom. The key part of a debate is that students have to defend a position. And the advocacy piece is a really important skill. A student can be detached from the content that I teach in my room if there's no expectation that they would have to defend a specific side. So it's one thing to learn about the War of 1812, and then it's a second thing to have to take a stand on a specific side in terms of how the United States should have responded to the War of 1812. For many students, that advocacy builds motivation and ownership. They feel like there's something at stake by the side that they take and the research that they do. And that oftentimes can encourage students to go above and beyond what you might normally see in their spoken performance or their written performance. Many all extracurricular debates and many debates that you have in your classroom should have some sort of resolution. This is sort of the statement or the question that you've crafted. If you're using Ohio Learning Standards, you're already creating guiding questions that you use as the focus of your lessons. You could just convert these into a resolution, and then that becomes the topic for the debate. The example here that I'm going to come back to a couple different times in this presentation is about, as a science teacher, you could have a debate about resolve. The nucleus is the most important part of a cell. And then the debate would focus on, no, actually, maybe it's the cell membrane, and that's the other side. And all of a sudden now, rather than we're just learning the parts of a cell, we're actually debating about which one is the most important. And that advocacy piece could build in some extra motivation and some extra incentive for students to go above and beyond and apply the knowledge rather than just sort of memorize it. Structured argument, so many different ways to say this. The debate across the curriculum textbook, which I had on the screen at the very beginning, they call this ARE model, argument, reason, evidence. Pretty much every debate coach that I've been around oftentimes refers to this as claim, warrant, impact. But no matter what you're calling it, this is an essential element of all good nonfiction writing. The idea that we want our students to formulate a claim, often as a topic sentence, to provide evidence or analysis that supports that claim in the middle sentences of said paragraph, and then have some sort of impact or explanation of why this matters as the final sentences of these paragraphs. Debate teaches that very well because you need those parts in order to make a convincing argument. And it's pretty easy to show that as examples for your students, and then for them to realize that as they're getting up and giving speeches. So again, this is a great way for you to sort of solidify and assess a lot of the writing skills and standards that you're probably focusing on already. The students are formulating all of these facts and all of these opinions and getting all this information that they're going to use to support their claims from text-based evidence. Those could be additional outside research if that applied to your curriculum and you felt like there was time for that. But likely it's the texts that you're already having them read. So it could be multiple primary sources in a social studies class. It could be the actual literature book that you're reading and you're going to have some sort of debate about the characters from in your ELA classroom. It could be different concepts or theories that are being discussed in a science classroom. It could be different ways to solve a geometry proof in a geometry classroom. There's really a number of different approaches that you could take to gather this stuff. So again, in the great classrooms that we already have, text-based evidence is being used all the time. We can use that evidence to help our students formulate arguments without adding in more things that we need to add on to. The one thing to think about, and again, I think this goes back to the whole research versus using outside research or class content, is the topic that you've constructed for the debate requiring students to generate their own points of view, right? So for example, is the character in the novel we're reading heroic? They're formulating their own opinions. They're probably not going out and reading other people's reviews on that question, right? Whereas if I was having students, as I sometimes do in my classroom debate, is lobbying good for our political system? That's not something our textbook doesn't touch on that. It's probably not something that they have natural opinions about prior to being in my classroom. And it'd be something that they would need to go out and find their own text-based evidence from, right? So the way we construct the question that's being discussed oftentimes has an impact on will outside research be required in order for students to achieve. Note-taking is a key part of having any debate. If the debate lasts more than a minute or two, there's going to be a lot of ideas and thoughts exchanged. Really important for students to be able to record those because they can't respond to things that they didn't remember or didn't record. In debate as an extracurricular, we call the note-taking process flowing. If you're familiar with the concept of a flow chart, it's the same idea. There are a huge variety of graphic organizers already available, and many that you may want to create or you could adapt that you're already using to illustrate this, right? So if the expectation in the debate in my classroom was that students would make 3 arguments in support of whatever our resolution was, you could have 3 circles on the left-hand side of the page with arrows drawn to other circles or maybe squares or different symbols to recognize a different speaker that then would indicate that the responses to those arguments would go just to the right. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could set it up, but the idea being if we can illustrate at sort of a visual image of arguments on a page, rather than just students taking notes directly as they would on filler paper, it's going to help them to organize thoughts, see connections between arguments, take notes, and enrich the speeches that they give. And again, I think if I have some available, I'd be happy to share with you if you're interested in doing this, but also if you just look up flowing templates, debate flowing templates, debate graphic organizers, there's a plentiful number of things you could use all over the internet. The final thing for you to think about as you think about what you need to do a debate in your classroom is what your students' needs are and what kind of engagement you can get from them. And that's something that only you can really answer. And you can really think about for your own curriculum and what kind of time you have available, right? Would this work better in an individual or group setting in your classroom? Are students, is winning and losing something that should be part of the conversation? I find that many times winning and losing the debate is a motivating factor that will help kids to sort of put in a little bit of extra effort that you might not see otherwise. At the same time, winning and losing shouldn't have an impact on their grade most likely. So there's lots of different philosophies about how you would want to handle that. And your students best and what's going to motivate them. And is that something you want to incorporate? What's the duration of the activity? So is this a 1 class, 2 class, 3 classes? Like, is it some sort of micro unit? How would what kind of time can you allocate to it? And then think about like what the preparation looks like. Do they read things at home and then come in and construct speeches at home and then come in and present them in class? Is there class time dedicated to that? And then they record things at home that then become part of the debate? A variety of different ways you could set that up. But knowing your students, knowing what their engagement level is and what their sort of level of proficiency with these different skills is, that allows you to sort of have the freedom to build an activity that works well for your classroom. Third module is the how-to. So this gets into a little more of the nuts and bolts, and mostly what I did for this module, there's no like one way to do it. I tried to present you with a variety of different ways that I've seen in my classroom or I've seen in other people's classrooms or from other examples in the debate across the curriculum resources I've engaged with, just to sort of think of some models that maybe you didn't think of and kind of give you an idea of what's possible. Again, sort of going back to what we ended the last module with, the things you have to think about is what part of your curriculum lends itself best to a debate format. As someone who teaches government and American history, there are many, many, many things that I think would be wonderful topics for my students to debate. Was slavery good or bad is not one of those topics, right? So you need to think about what are conversations in our classroom that are things that there are multiple points of view that are acceptable and available to find information about, and not things that are going to call into question people's values or accepted facts. Those are not things that make for good debates. And you need to think about, how does this fit? What would be the topics in my classroom that would be useful? An example that I've encountered recently, as if I was an environmental sciences teacher, I would not want to have a debate, is climate change real? Because we've now reached a place in human development where that is not really a question. What our response to climate change should be is a very much an open question, right? So like we could craft a question that would allow students to really do in-depth research about climate change without debating its validity, which is not really something that scientists are questioning at this point. Think about, is this going to serve as a formative or a summative assessment in your classroom? That has a lot of implications in terms of how much time you would dedicate to it or how you would grade it. What are you replacing in your curriculum with this debate activity? Which is going to give you a sense of how much time the fit is. And then what skills am I trying to build here, right? Like, am I doing this just because we need a public speaking focus and we don't currently have one? Do I really think that we need to deepen those critical writing skills? Because depending on how you answer that question and what skills you want, that's going to help you focus on what model of debate, what sort of emphasis I'm going to put on the different things that I'm going to build into my activity. I just wanted to start with this. This is just a screenshot I took from the Boston Debate League website, and it's a wonderful resource. They've got a huge number of topics available for pretty much every discipline that they've provided to middle school and high school teachers in the city of Boston that you can grab and use for yourself. So I highly recommend you check out their website. They have this as a sentence STEM activity, and I think that's a really important thing to think about, especially if the students you're teaching are less experienced with this or at the younger level of their academic careers. I've seen with my own children that it's very typical for elementary educators, as they're teaching nonfiction writing and structures of paragraphs and structures of arguments, for them to use sentence stems that look very much like these. And if we can sort of almost Mad Lib style encourage our students to use these sentence stems as they're constructing arguments and using evidence to support their claims, even absent a debate format, we're building them up and getting them ready to a place where they could then use those to argue against a different point of view. So I highly recommend this sort of Mad Lib style use of sentence stems. It's going to help students structure their nonfiction writing better and get them ready for a debate activity if you felt like they weren't currently ready for one in your classroom. So multi-group debate. So I hinted at this one previously when we were talking about a previous example with the human cell. Imagine a classroom where you have 20 students. That might be a dream for some of you, but just use that as an example at the moment. I could create 5 groups of 4 debating the topic, what is the most important part of a human cell? So one could have the nucleus as their assigned most important part. One could have a cell membrane. I'm showing you that I'm not a science teacher because I don't know the other parts, but I know there are more than just those 2. And you would assign different roles to each of the 4 people in the group. One person would have the job of reading the 2-minute prepared case. So that would be, they would say, my partners and I believe that the nucleus is the most important part of the human cell. Here are our reasons why. And then they would sort of go into their textual based evidence to support that claim. You'd have a second group that would be a second person in the group that would be in charge of the cross-examination of the other groups. So you would build in time for questioning, where the nucleus group could ask a question of the cell membrane group to sort of maybe show the weakness in their argument and why the nucleus is the most important. We could have a third person in each group who's responsible for a rebuttal. So they would give a up to 2-minute response where they would then hear the main reasons of the other side and then come up with some reasons why those arguments are not as valid. And then the fourth person in each group would give a 1-minute closing argument. You add up that time, and then you provide 3 minutes of preparation time in between each segment of the debate, right? So we would do the 4 2-minute cases, 5 2-minute cases, 1 for each group, a 3-minute break where they could work together as a team, 5 2-minute cross-examinations, 3 more minutes where they could work together as a team. You go through and add this up, it would fill in perfectly a 50-minute period. Some things about this format of a debate that are definite strengths. I think the cooperative learning here would be a major strength. I think the idea that you could get all 20 kids to speak in 50 minutes is a major strength, right? You sort of like are planning out the time and using it incredibly efficiently. All of that seemed to me to be major strengths of this approach. And maybe you have material in your curriculum that would work well as a multi-group debate and you could just incorporate in that way. What I see as weaknesses of this approach, not really weaknesses, but just like things to be aware of. 20 might not be your class size. It might be significantly larger than that, which would mean I would need to like maybe do 2 of these debates. Maybe I involve 15 kids each day and I do it spread over 2 periods. And then the other 15 kids who aren't debating that day act as the judges who give feedback to the other students or, somehow pick a winner and the prize is a piece of candy or something like that, that might be motivating, but isn't necessarily based on a grade. The other thing I see as a potential challenge of this is not every bit of your curriculum is going to have a set of information that's at least 4 or 5 different options where you could have this sort of format of debate, right? Not all material lends itself to this. I've done a debate very similar to this in my classroom about different perspectives about the War of 1812 and should America have gone to war in 1812? And it becomes a bit of a stretch. Like there's obviously a yes, we should and a no, we shouldn't. And then there's sort of like a variety of positions in the middle, like we should under these conditions, or we should in this way. But that sometimes could feel a bit contrived, right? And you have to decide if this is the format of debate that most appealed to me, because it got a lot of kids speaking in an efficient way, what topics in my classroom would allow me to sort of implement this. And it might not always be the easiest fit. So like I can't pull this off frequently in my classroom because not all the material lends itself well to this format. Another option, this one also happens to be science from the Boston Debate League. I don't know what any of these bonds are, but they're obviously different concepts from chemistry. So they've come up with here a really fun topic about superheroes who would be made of these bonds and like which one would be the best. That would be a really fun way to learn about that scientific concept in a debate format. But again, if you don't have multiple kinds of bonds, this 4 or 5 different point of view topic doesn't really lend itself well to this kind of a debate. A format that I use more frequently is what I call dueling speeches. And again, there's a million different variations on this. The example that I have done for the longest in my classroom is the one on the screen. So I'll use that as an example. It's obviously not the only example. I have students in groups of 3 read primary source documents from either W.E.B. Du Bois or Booker T. Washington as part of a unit we do about Reconstruction. Those 2 men are famous African-American leaders from the turn of the 20th century, have different ideas about what the best path forward is for African-Americans when it comes to fighting against segregation and working towards civil rights. They read the primary source in groups primarily because for my 8th graders, these primary sources are complicated to read. They need to rely on each other to do some decoding to pull out what the key arguments are. And the group work piece works really well for that. Once they've finished with their group and sort of crafted a set of bullet points about what their assigned man's point of view is, I then ask them to write a 90-second speech where they will take on the role of Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois and sort of try to persuade the audience that their approach to civil rights is the right approach. I also have them create one question that they would ask someone with the opposite point of view. I do this as an in-class activity, primarily because then I have all eyes on their reading skills, their writing skills, and I'm using that as a form of formative assessment. It helps me get a sense of how they can analyze primary sources, how they can construct arguments. I get a lot of sort of anecdotal feedback about that. Excuse me. We then have the students sort of go up and give speeches back to back. So we would hear from a Booker T. Washington individual, we would hear from a WEB individual. They would ask each other their questions and they'd be required to try to answer them. My whole class watches these. We don't pick a winner or a loser. We sort of just give a power clap for everybody for doing it. And I'm scoring the speeches as I watch and the questioning as I watch it on a rubric. Strengths of this are that it's relatively easy to find two different points of view about a topic, and this lends itself well to that. There's a million different ways you could modify it. So you could build in more time for questioning if you wanted to. You could change the length of the speech. You could have them do the primary sources or whatever the two textual-based evidence pieces were at home and write the speech at home, and then they just come in and deliver it. Or if you don't want to dedicate the classroom time to the delivery, maybe they record the speech and they upload it to your learning management system and you assess it that way. So there's so many different ways you could incorporate this. I think this is a really good activity for focusing on public speaking, which is something I think all teachers should at least incorporate somewhere in their curriculum. Some downsides to this are, especially if you have a large class, it takes a long time to watch 25 speeches, some of which are going to be overlapping because there's only 2 points of view. So you're going to hear the same points about Booker T. Washington's perspective over and over and over again. And that might get dull for your students. So I see that as a challenge. I don't know that the critical thinking skills built from this are that immense. I mean, they're definitely better than doing something that just involves rote learning. But if you built in time for response, time for more questioning, you're obviously going to get a bigger payoff when it comes to building critical thinking skills. So again, like, it's all about where you want to start and how you want to build things in. This is a very easy format to include. I suspect a lot of teachers are probably doing things like this already in their classrooms. But are there ways, is that enough? Or the way I use it in my classroom is this is a starting point. So we teach this sort of earlier in the year. We do many of these different sort of dueling speeches activities as a way to get kids feeling comfortable with public speaking, increasingly write longer and longer pieces that have the support of textual evidence, building up towards a much larger debate project at the end of the year. So is this just a way that you scaffold them on these activities? All things for you to think about as you try to construct debate activities in your own units. Maybe the easiest format of debate for you to incorporate in your classroom is what I call a quick write. And I did not come up with this on my own. I don't remember which of the different debate across the curriculum books and resources I got this from. I have students either read primary sources or as sort of a warm-up activity after we've talked about a topic. In this case, it would be talked about World War II and the use of nuclear weapons in Japan. The students come in, I just say, take out a piece of paper. I assign them a side. So yes, dropping the atomic bomb was a good idea. No, it was not. Give them 2 minutes, quick write. Get as many of your ideas out there. Convince us that it was not a good idea. You could make it any amount of time you wanted. They then exchange the paper with the person sitting next to them who has the opposite point of view. The students then have 90 seconds to write a response. You could go back and forth multiple times where they're just, instead of speaking out loud, they're just writing out their thoughts, right? This is engaging in a debate. It's just not an oral debate. It's a written debate. There's a lot of benefits to this. It's quick. They're really sharpening those critical thinking skills right away. They're not spending any time listening to other people speak in a way that might get repetitive. This would be a really great exit ticket activity that you could use as they're leaving your classroom to get a sense of, can they think quickly and establish the information that we talked about to defend their point of view? There's just a variety of different ways that this is efficient and quick and effective. Obviously, it's also limited. in that it's not going to have the public speaking piece built in unless you have them read that stuff out loud. You might need to build in more time. Maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes isn't enough. You feel like your students would need more processing time in order to get started. I've found that these are highly motivating to students. Students love to do these. They really get into it when they pass the papers back and forth to each other. Sometimes they're talking a little smack as they do it, and maybe that's appropriate and fun depending on the topic. But again, some version of this that you modify to fit your curriculum could be a great way to build student engagement, get them to think quickly and think critically, and incorporate these ideas into your lessons. I'm going to stop this presentation for a second just to show you an entire debate unit. I have the flexibility as a middle school teacher and a private school teacher to do longer units that aren't necessarily just tied to state standards. And so I have that flexibility gives me a lot of freedom to incorporate debate in different ways. The last 3 weeks of the school year for me, I do an interdisciplinary unit. I've done it with the English teacher that teaches at my grade level. So all the students would work on it in their history and English time. Last year, the science teacher and I did an interdisciplinary debate unit about different responses to climate change, which I really loved because it was a great way to work. She was excited to be talking about scientific knowledge and having them read really current thinking about energy systems, which was one of the things they'd studied this year. And that allowed, and I was really excited to be tackling a really tough current event and having them read all kinds of nonfiction to build their arguments with. The way we set this project up is we spend a week in groups doing the research piece, and then we grade all the research. The next week, they spend that week writing their position paper, using that graded research to write sort of like their best nonfiction writing of the year. And then we actually have a debate. Everyone debates 3 on 3. So it takes an entire period to have 6 kids debate. So it takes a week of class time to give them that luxury. They really have to work, right? Because during that period, they're speaking for 5 minutes each. That's a lot. I mean, they needed a lot of scaffolding to build up to that level. This may not work at all for your classroom. I'm fully aware of that. But I just wanted to put it out there as this is the kind of project and program you can create if it will fit. And again, I think this is the sort of culminating activity that might be a really wonderful capstone in a class that you're currently teaching. Okay. This would be the moment where it probably is a good idea for you if you're doing this to really sort of deeply think about your own curriculum, maybe to stop the video and work on busting out a quick lesson plan. Where would I do this in my classroom? And use that information from the what, why, and how that we previously talked about to sort of come up with something you want to implement. When I'm doing this as a course for credit at BW, students would write a lesson plan and then they would get feedback from each other on it. And we would sort of talk about the pros and cons and how much it's incorporating the different fundamental elements of a debate activity. I'm happy to provide that back and forth with you. Maybe the teachers in your building or your grade level are willing to provide that with you if a bunch of you are looking to incorporate these ideas together. But hopefully that would be great if you would take that time to do the implementation. The final module for us then is the challenges piece, right? So now that we've built a lesson, we're getting ready to implement it in our classroom. What are some of the things we need to think about and try to problem solve? Because this is not an activity that's going to work perfectly. No lesson plan works perfectly for every student in our classroom, and debate activities would be no exception to that. If you think about the different students in your classroom and the different needs that they have, you know that there are some kids who would love an activity like this and some who would recoil at the idea of having to do some sort of debate in your classroom. I very strongly believe that some kids reacting negatively is not a reason not to do it. Our job as educators is to push them out of their comfort zone, not in a way that causes them trauma, but to push them out of their comfort zone in a way that we can provide the support necessary to help them grow. And I really do think these debate activities stretch kids in ways that they're not asked to in many of our classrooms. And that really causes quite a bit of growth and helps them realize things about their skills and about their interests that maybe they didn't even know they had. You as the educator should probably think through some of these pitfalls ahead of time and have plans in place to address them in order for this to be a successful lesson. So I just sort of, to conclude tonight, I just have some of the different kids I've seen in my classroom and how I try to tackle helping them to make these activities successful. Okay, so we all have students who are extreme introverts, who you probably don't know what their voice sounds like because they almost never speak if they can get away with it. So these kids are the ones who are in the back of the room hiding and are quiet already. Debate is a way to sort of force them to come out of their shell. Again, to go from this kid never speaks to now you're expected to walk in and give a 5-minute speech, that's going to be traumatic and not very productive, right? But how can I modify activities to sort of work through the challenges of kids who really are shy and don't feel comfortable speaking in public to help them? Okay, so there's a couple different ways. I could scaffold these activities. So we start by giving a 30-second speech. And then we build up. The next time we do this, it's a minute. Next time we do it, it's 90 seconds. And over the course of an entire school year, if we did these activities just 6 times, right, we've given kids some structure, some support where they can feel successful and hopefully build up towards something that is a longer presentation. You could do things in groups. So if I knew I had some kids who were sort of extremely introverted, I could pick the groups in a way that they don't all end up in the same group. And then maybe they choose to be involved in the pre-written speech piece, which would be something that they might feel more comfortable reading than having to come up with things on the fly. Or maybe they're involved in the questioning where they would only have to speak to ask a short question or respond to someone else's question in a brief way. And that would feel more comfortable for them. I've had students who did the dueling speeches piece where they only delivered the speech for me instead of in front of all the other students. I don't think long-term that's an ideal solution, but to help a student start to build some confidence and feel more comfortable, I think that's a totally appropriate accommodation if you can find a way to make that work. Maybe you're having them record the speeches at home on video and then playing them during class. That might help a kid who's really shy. So there's a lot of different ways you can tackle this without just saying, oh, I've got 3 kids who won't speak and I'm not going to do this activity because it won't work for them. I really think we got to find ways to help them feel more comfortable rather than just shying away from this completely because they might react poorly. You have the perfectionists in your classroom, right? These are the kids who need there to be a right answer and really feel challenged by having to give a rebuttal speech during a debate because they don't know what the other kids are going to say ahead of time, and they're not sure they'll be ready to respond when that happens. Okay. Again, I feel like one of the ways we really need to push our perfectionist kids and help them to realize that there's not always one answer and they can't always be 100% prepared for what life brings at them is by doing these sorts of activities. Ways you can make it feel safer for them is one, assuring them that small stumbles in a speech is not going to mean a bad grade because you judge an extemporaneous speech or a rebuttal speech differently than you would a kid who had time to prepare and pre-write. You could do a one-on-one meeting ahead of time where they could practice this. You could give very, very strict prep time limits so they don't stay up all night researching every possible thing the other team could say, right? And sort of way over preparing. So there's a variety of different ways you could help this kind of student manage their anxiety and their expectations in order to find it to be successful. If you're deciding to use someone winning and someone losing in the classroom, you're going to have the overly competitive kids who are going to call names and shout people down and do whatever they can do to win because winning is what's important. Thinking about ways to handle that, right? You could just take the win and loss piece out of the equation and make that not relevant to what you do. in your classroom. You could modify the group piece so that sometimes I've had the like win at all costs kids debate against each other, so that they don't ruin the experience for a kid who's a little less competitive but just wants to get the skill-based piece out of this. You could just sort of have a clear ground rule about expectations, especially when it comes to being tolerant and respectful of others, and not using ad hominem attacks. There's just a variety of different ways you could sort of prep for this. But again, going into the activity eyes wide open, knowing 5 to 10% of your students are going to be these like win at all costs, like see this as blood sport or as their extracurricular athletic event. Knowing that, you can strategize and plan for how to make it successful. The last thing I wanted to add, and I teach in an all-girls school, so I'm particularly sensitive to these issues. You only need to be paying to American politics for the last 10 years to realize there are serious gender implications when it comes to activities like debate and how we expect people and how we evaluate people when they do public speaking. I don't know that this is like 100% an issue in every classroom every day, but I definitely have noticed in extracurricular debate that sometimes people will make comments when they're evaluating or judging a female student's performance that they would never say when they're evaluating a male student's performance. And Rich Kowalik at Laurel School and a bunch of other people have done like a research about sort of quantifying this, and it's profound and something we should think about in our classrooms. In a co-ed environment, you may see some of your female students really shy away from even participating in an activity like this. So there's a variety of different ways you could strategize. You could sort of just like lay everything on the table and talk about gender bias in communication before you did the activity. You could do single gender groupings in your debates, right? So if your class is roughly 50-50 male, female, you could have your female students do a debate, and then the next day your male students do a debate. You could sort of separate it in that way. It might just, that wouldn't normally be the way you would probably do things in a co-ed school, but it might be an interesting sort of social experiment to see if that changes the way the students engage with the activity. Again, my main concerns would be, one, that you would not do a debate event in your classroom because you were concerned about gender implications, or that you would not have thought about it before you went in and did a debate, and then you would see, your female students really performing in a way that was not normal because of the way they viewed themselves and how they thought women should behave during an activity like this. So I just sort of, again, my goal of sort of throwing what the problems might be at you. I'm sure there are many other problems that I haven't even thought of that you come to your mind immediately. But we want you to build these activities into your classroom and be really successful with them. So I want you to sort of have some opportunity to say, who's going to find this to be a challenge, and how am I going to modify it in order to make it successful for everybody in the classroom. That is the end of the presentation tonight. I hope that you've got some new information out of this and that it sends you off into the world of your classroom, excited to try something new and looking for different ways to incorporate a debate unit. I would love to hear from you. If you did incorporate a debate unit, I would be happy to tackle your questions and converse with you if you had other questions or things you wanted to talk about or ask about, because I really do believe that as much as I love extracurricular debate, the future of debate is doing it in our classrooms every day. And we can expose so many more kids who would never be able to or have the interest to attend a debate tournament on a weekend if we can get more and more educators in our schools to try debate in every discipline, every grade level, not just the social studies classroom, not just the seniors, and really embrace a culture of debate as a way to grow civic participation and critical thinking among all of our students. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, I hope to see you doing debates in your classroom sometime soon. Take care.